Welcome to You, Me, Empathy. Thank you for listening. We would like to remind you that this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Known as just a silly boy with a feely heart. Please consider supporting the show. Check us out on Patreon or simply leave a review on iTunes. Here's your host and creator of the show, Known Wells.
Greetings, feely humans. Welcome to You, Me, Empathy. My name is Known Wells, and today on episode 30 of You, Me, Empathy, Tony the therapist and I explore the psychology of narcissism, the common traits of narcissistic personality disorder, and the ways human kindness and love can help us better understand narcissism. I also talk a lot about my father and how his narcissistic type traits affected me during my childhood. We also talk about reconciling with the fact that it seems to me, and this is sort of my personal bent, is that arrogant, ego-driven people are in power. And I worry about that often, think about it often, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. But before we get into episode 30 today, I did want to read an email I got from a listener by the name of Vic. And Vic listened to episode 29 and reached out to me after listening to it and was offended, was impacted, perhaps potentially negatively. And I wanted to read her response and maybe some subsequent responses that we went back and forth via email with. And I just think it's a really important email, and I wanted to read it here for you. And so here goes. So this is from Vic, a listener of You, Me, Empathy. She says, quote, I have been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and had to stop listening to this week's episode when I and some of my friends were being called, quote, developmentally stunted, dangerous, can't form that kind of bond vis-a-vis treatment, pod people, not having a moral compass, and lacking a fundamental sense of humanity, end quote. Not being able to feel the way other people do, lacking a natural sense of empathy is something I work hard to counteract through a very strong sense of morality. It's something that has created a comorbid depression and anxiety in me. It is part of my mental health and something that group therapy and symptomatic medication helps me function in society. I have to make an effort to feel in ways that others do naturally, channel my narcissism into healthy habits, such as saying, I'm awesome as heck, so I must be awesome enough to not do X, Y, and Z. And forming emotional bonds without empathy, but nonetheless built on love, respect, and other senses of sympathy I can feel. Fuck abusers. And I can't ask for empathy from people who have suffered in the ways your guest described, especially since I can't fully offer it in response. Only sympathy and anger on her behalf. Frustration with the ways our society has failed to help domestic abuse victims, especially children. Sadness at the failures of our mental health system. But it really sucks to listen to a podcast about mental health and then be so thoroughly dehumanized for my mental disorder. And that's the end of the email I received from Vic. And I just wanted to say, and I responded to Vic immediately, and I kind of went to a very sensitive place and felt like, oh no, I've upset someone. I reached out and I said I was sorry, and I appreciated her perspective, and we've gone back and forth a few times, and we're good. And you know, my initial take on it was like, oh shoot, I made a mistake. I failed in doing what I want to do in this podcast. But what it really got me thinking about was this podcast, You, Me, Empathy, is about creating a safe space for our personal stories. And as I relay over and over again on this show, I'm not a professional. I think that's an important context to have. And also, as Vic is very eloquently saying, she has her own experience. I'm not privy to that experience. And I think it's an important one, and her perspective is valid and important to me, and I care about her, and I appreciate her courage for reaching out. And I guess I just wanted to share with Vic and with the listeners that, I am here every week talking about stuff, and sometimes, most of the time I'm, just talking from my feely heart, and in that place there's perchance opportunity for, speaking maybe out of line, or speaking to something that maybe not true for others, but it may be true from my own personal vantage point, and that vantage point, especially in the context of narcissism, which was evident in episode 29 and is certainly evident in episode 30, which you're about to hear. My vantage point is very sensitive because I was deeply impacted by my own father, who presented as a narcissist. Now, my father isn't clinically diagnosed as someone with narcissistic personality disorder. So, I guess that may be a bit unfair, but he sort of ruled with an iron fist, and that fist was leading with arrogance and a lack of empathy and ego, and it affected me. And I'm still affected by those representations, or the presentations rather, today. And so that's not an excuse. That's just me being sensitive and having a feeling heart. And I guess I just wanted to relate to everyone that, like, I love you. I'm doing my best here. I know Vic is a listener, and I appreciate her listening every week. And I just wanted to say to Vic here on the podcast that I am sorry. I am sorry. I didn't want to offend. I didn't want to invalidate her experience. Her experience is valid to me, and it's important to me. And sometimes I just, things can be taken different ways, and having mental illness is a sensitive place, and we often do feel alone in our mental illness, and we want to fight for it. And that makes sense to me, and I've been there. And I guess I just wanted to say to all of you that you're not alone, that we're in this together, that no matter what, every week I'm here doing my best to give space for personal stories and vulnerability and empathy and kindness. And if I come across, in regards to narcissism, as someone who doesn't have empathy or sympathy toward someone who is diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, for that I am sorry. And I don't want that. I just want love and kindness and empathy and all these things. And I'm rambling forever, and I'm sorry, but I love you, and I just wanted to share that. And I appreciate Vic for sharing that, and I'm looking forward to further communication with her. And if you ever want to reach out to me, I'm always open. Honestly, I'm an open heart. I'm an open book. I wear my feely heart on my sleeve, as you guys know. So, without further ado, thanks for listening to that little rambling spiel, and enjoy this episode 30, with Tony the therapist on the psychology of narcissism. Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our neuroses, our mental illnesses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human.
Cut. Blooper reel.
The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly without judgment about our neuroses, our mental illnesses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being human. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I am with Tony for Tony Time.
Tony time. How you doing, Noan?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
Today, Tony and I will be exploring narcissistic fathers and narcissism. This is a follow-up episode to my chat with Sherry Heller on narcissistic fathers and her experience with her father and, a pretty traumatic childhood. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and do that. It is a great one, and I really appreciate Sherry for sharing her story. So, Tony, before we get into it, introduce yourself and do your little spiel.
All right. So my name is Anthony Romaiki, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in the state of California, beautiful California. And known as destroying the studio.
Keep going.
As we talk. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, and I'm licensed with the Board of Behavioral Sciences, license number LMFT 47805. I have a private practice that I do in the city of Tustin, California. And that's,
Awesome.
That's my job, man.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's my job,
That's
man.
my job. Which I love.
Yeah. Yeah, you do.
We're a little goofy because
We just finished the timeline of this. We just finished recording our first live.
We did.
Instagram live episode. Not episode. We just had an Instagram live. And so my throat is a little tired and my allergies are high and we're a little goofy.
we're just a little goofy
we're
now.
just a little goofy.
So,
So all the more reason to talk about narcissism.
right.
Well, let's start with what is your experience in sort of treating narcissism, addressing narcissism, recognizing narcissism?
Yeah, it's a really kind of fascinating characterological either pathology, disorder, and people with narcissists. It, as Dr. or Sherry Heller points out, you can really, it's kind of a spectrum-based type of issue, and I know she had mentioned in her episode, which again, an amazing episode. If people haven't listened to that episode, highly encouraged to go back and listen to that, because she really did have quite a story and a very profound early childhood, or throughout childhood, but certainly starting almost immediately, a very, profound childhood experience. And, dealing with somebody, again, with either narcissistic traits, going all the way up to somebody who has maybe not what we would consider narcissistic personality disorder. And there's a difference. And again, it's a spectrum difference, meaning that, once a certain level of criteria has been met, then according to the American Psychiatric Association, that, we have the diagnostic statistical manual that we use for diagnosing disorders. If you have full criteria, then you can actually be somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. So again, you can have traits of this particular issue, or you can have, if severe enough, you can have the actual clinical disorder. And people, again, can have traits, and some of which are developmental in nature, and some of which, though, can become a fixed kind of way in which the personality structure of a person is actually organized, and the way in which they permanently, in a sense, or fully function from. And that's certainly on the more severe spectrum, where you're actually talking about somebody who clinically has that disorder.
What is your personal experience as a therapist in sort of interacting with narcissism?
Well, it's interesting. As Sherry had pointed out, these tend to be, or can be, I should say, treatment resistant, in the sense that if you have somebody with full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, probably not. Again, I've no research to support that, just kind of anecdotal, but probably not the people who are going to seek out therapy on their own terms, meaning they're probably not the people who are going to come into psychotherapy looking to work on their narcissistic personality disorder. More often, if you're going to see them in therapy, you'll probably see them present maybe relationally, meaning you may see them coming into therapy because they're unhappy with what they're not getting in life, meaning they may be unhappy with what they're not getting from a spouse, or they might be unhappy with what they may not be getting from a job or their career, or a general expectation of what they think they're deserving of in life. Again, because if you're thinking about this personality dynamic, this is the type of person who's going to tend to have a more grandiose perspective. They're going to have a more grandiose self-perception. And so there's going to be maybe a higher sense of entitlement in what they feel they're deserving of in life. So they may present potentially by coming in and saying that, their wife, if it's a male, let's say they may come in presenting that their wife needs fixed because she's not somehow good enough. Or again, there's some maybe depression or maybe disappointment around that they're not further along in their career, or that, good enough things aren't happening. Or if they may potentially present, if it's an issue of, let's say, sexual acting out behaviors in which they've been caught, and the only way potentially that their marriage is going to be saved is, maybe they may come into therapy, but again, not generally going to present because they're wanting to fix their narcissistic personality disorder. So
it makes sense because they're the best. Why would they need fixing?
Right.
Yeah.
So, to be able to, as Sherry points out, for them to be able to look at themselves realistically is generally not going to happen. I mean,
right.
This is a pathology in which the person is probably not recognizing that, they have this particular, narcissistic structure. And so because they're not going to look at themselves necessarily through the eyes of some deficit, right? They're not going to see necessarily their shortcomings. They're going to be more invested in seeing themselves as, maybe better than the average person. And so, so they may present disappointed in the things around them, but maybe probably not disappointed necessarily in themselves.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm just like, yep. I'm just like thinking of my father and sort of, everything in his world was about him, and he was superior than everyone. And I have this distinct memory of my dad. He'd come, we'd played soccer, and, as kids, and I played soccer until I was, after college. I played for like 25 years, but I remember I must have been like 10 or 11 or something, and he'd yell.
Yeah.
He'd yell at us like on the sideline a lot, especially my sister and I. And it was embarrassing. It was shame, because he had so much anger. He wanted us to win and beat everyone, and he wanted it to be perfect. And I remember this one time he was yelling, and he was criticizing the way I was running. He was criticizing my form, and I remember him saying, "Pick your head up, get your, and I don't know what I was doing, but like that comes to mind sometimes when I'm running, and it's just like, get out of my head."
Yeah.
But there. Everything about his world was, how was I or his kids or his coworkers or whatever making him look
right.
That was his whole world.
Yeah.
The cat that came into the house and he threw from the balcony, right?
Right.
Like that was affecting him. He didn't think of how how that may have been to me and my younger brother. Like, we were enjoying having fun with this little kitty that we found who was a homeless kitty.
Yeah.
And we were caring for it. He didn't care how that impacted our emotions in a positive way, potentially.
Right.
He only cared that he had allergies and that cat needed to go. And the way it needed to go was, this brutal and violent way. Right.
Wow.
And that's my sort of vision of my father.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the thing that you're tapping into when you talk about that story, and again, you and Sherry had talked about this in the last episode, was, in these people, in these narcissistic presentations, it's that absence of empathy. It's that not understanding the impact, right? That a person, again, with this particular issue, the way in which they impact other people. There's that absence of awareness of the hurt they cause, the pain they can inflict. And they can do the things they do because they don't have that feedback loop. There's not that type of empathy, right? That type of understanding of another human's, emotional experience is lost to some degree. It's not a complete, again, depending on where a person may fall on this particular issue. And on the more extreme sides, where you start to fall into is sociopathy, right? Psychopathy. I mean, really further in the spectrum where there's just complete absence, right, of another person's emotions and feelings and experiences. And and to your other point, this idea that the people around them are more or less just an extension of them. And so how do you meet up in their eyes, right? How do you represent them in your activities, your behaviors, your goals, your jobs? Because again, that feeling that everything reflects on them.
Right.
And so, this particular dynamic can come with a tremendous amount of criticalness, right? Critical, judgmental, shaming, because again, I think the attempt is the potential attempt from the narcissist is to correct whatever behavior they find disapproving.
Right.
Not recognizing, the other person as another person.
Right.
As a completely distinct, separate human being who has their own emotions, desires, goals.
There's no consideration for that.
Even think there's no consideration. There's no seeing, and maybe you're right on the lighter end consideration, and on the more severe end, just complete lack of acknowledgement or ability to see it.
Yeah.
So it's these potentially are very difficult people to be in relationship with. Either from a partner perspective or from certainly from the perspective of a child. These are very, very, very difficult people to be into relationship with. As I think. Sherry was able to share her own personal story of what that was like for her and the impact that had, both her experience of her father, but also, also the experience of a mother with a mental illness. So,
yeah. What do you suppose the impact of, so I'll preface this question by saying, my father was very about the perception of us as a family and,
sure.
how things looked, how things appeared. Wanted us to tuck in our shirts. Our backpacks had to be a specific, spot when we got home. If they were someplace else, it was yelling and berating. Why does that come into the mix? Why does the sort of the perception thing come into the mix for those types of people?
Well, I think it comes down to, because maybe if I'm hearing this, if I'm tracking with your presentation of this, I think what I feel like I'm hearing is that idea of why is presentation so important to these people? Is that?
Yeah. Why? I mean,
why does this disorder have a high need for
appearance? Because he was like, in my mind, as a child, his relationship with mom was terrible, right? And he was a terrible father. Like those were my experiences in many ways, not always, but in many ways. And so the sort of, you got to tuck your shirt in when you go to church. You gotta like be this way. He was very about like how people perceived us as a unit, right? And to me, that spoke of like, maybe this is wrong, but like at the time, like as a kid, I was like, oh, he just wants, like, he realizes that it's not all hunky dory, and he wants people to think that because they will think higher of him, they will think better of him. He's the patriarch of this shining beacon of familial, compatibility or whatever.
Yeah.
And like that was just like, I got that so much from him. Like it was about like how he looked, and like he was very like about how he looked and was perceived, and it was always so gross to me. And so maybe it's just like, it goes back to like Narcissus himself, about he's looking in the, I guess he was looking in the puddle.
He's looking at the,
looking at his reflection. He was very much about just solely focused on how he was perceived and how he existed, and he'd use whatever method to build himself up.
Sure. I mean, I think, with this, presentation, again, if you're, with a, narcissistic, person, and again, maybe important to preface, I don't know your dad, and I'm certainly not diagnosing him in any way or another, or even, ascribing any attributes of this to him, since I don't know him at all. But maybe just talking about it in general, in general terms, I think what you might tend to see with this particular presentation or characterological presentation is somebody who might tend to be very externally focused, for, maybe some of the reasons that you were talking about, which is people's perceptions are going to be of really high value. And the better the outward appearance, right? The potential for higher praise, the potential for higher, validating a certain standard, right? A certain standard of excellence, or a certain standard of perfection, or a certain standard of beauty. It's that external attempt to be, validated, right? Or, that searching for affirmation of value, right? And, because I think ultimately, the development of a narcissistic personality structure is really reactive.
Is it insecurity some?
Ultimately, I think, if you get underneath the structure, I think what you're going to find is a really, 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 more fragile, sense of self, and a really insecure sense of self,
right?
And with very, 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 very low self-value. And again, I think as we tend to talk about, when we talk about mental health-based issues and these relationally based issues, it's the idea that, even this personality structure was adaptive and protective, as this person received more than likely, their own very early shaping childhood experiences that necessitated the development of this type of adaptive personality structure. And from my, so it is, in my opinion, mixed with some temperament based issues. This again becomes very much an adaptive personality structure, very much based in survivability, as we've talked a lot about. And I think generally what you're talking about is some very early, developmental shaping, and stunting that has occurred, in which the person is very, very, very much developmentally stunted at a very, very, very young age. And kind of around, roughly around that, 18 months to 24 months, maybe to 28 months developmental period, in which, you hear, people talk about the terrible twos, and that very much the world revolves around me type of self-centered type of perspective in which there's not yet a lot of development around separateness, right? There's not a lot of development yet around you're a distinct person, I'm a distinct person, and what I do can negatively impact you and have, there's usually more kind of, there isn't that type of differentiation, and there's still very much this, it's all around, it's all about me. And again, very much survival based. But this ultimately becomes a functioning, again, on the more severe side, this ultimately becomes a actual personality structure that the person lives out of. I mean, this is how they live their life, is out of this very rigid personality structure. And if you don't, evolve, right? If there isn't some type of intervention to shape and create a different dynamic, then, you're going to carry with you this very, self-centered type of perspective that the world really does revolve around me, and you're an extension of me. Everyone around me is an extension of me, and you are there to serve my purposes and my benefit. And it's, and again, that's why these people, can be very difficult to be in a relationship with for that reason.
So maybe let's let's not talk about like the actual like clinical narcissistic, diagnosis,
sure.
But maybe just talking about like, I'm curious about, your experience in addressing some like arrogance or ego or those types of things. Like what kinds of things are you talking about with your patients when it comes to those things?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, because I think in working with, even maybe the traits that may present in therapy, I think what's important to recognize for me in working with this population is recognizing that this is still a person who's presenting with very unmet needs, and this is a person who is still presenting with hurt and pain, and that, there's potentially a lot of, fortification that has occurred, but this is a person in pain. This is a wounded person who didn't get what they needed when they needed it. And so their presentation, again, is adaptive. And again, wherever that falls on the spectrum, right? But it's still very somewhat adaptive. So what I find is it's still really important to conceptualize the person from that place, and to really kind of conceptualize it from a place that I personally think is still very helpful, and I feel like I've had good progress with, is really helping the person recognize, even again, if they're presenting with this idea that I'm not getting what I'm wanting, and being able to really be able to kind of meet them still in that place of, you're right, I don't think you are. Mm-hmm. And we're still continuing to speak to that early place of wounding. So I'm not necessarily speaking to it in the place that they think I'm speaking to it, meaning in the ways in which they feel like they're not getting what they want today. Mm-hmm. But really recognizing that there's a part of them that is still crying out for what it is they did not get. Right. And there is still an original wound, there is still an original hurt, and there are unmet needs that weren't met. And I think being able to join them in a healthy way, in that position and in that place, again, I find is very helpful. And once there's that, I think once there's that feeling of alignment between you and them, and once they recognize that you are there to care for them, meaning you do care about, because they want that, right? I mean, that's part of the presentation.
Yeah.
They want to be important. They want to be seen as important. And once they feel that you're aligning with them in the fact that they're important, I think that's important in that therapeutic process of being able to join with them. And then I think you get the opportunity, once that trust is built, to be able to start making some headway and so in the way of some gentle confrontation, to be able to start pointing out, I don't know if going about that has been the best way for you in getting that need met. What do you think? How do you feel like that's been going? Mm-hmm. And again, very gently being able to confront these maybe relational areas in which they're really struggling, and present to them in a way in which, again, they feel cared about, but you can make some headway with them, because they're not having to necessarily defend against you as well. And again, once they feel like you're for them, I think you can speak to this, and I do think you can begin to kind of speak your way into them and get them to slowly understand that what they've done may not be getting them what they want, in terms of what they really want, what they're really wanting, or what they're really needing, I should say.
Yeah. Plus, it's got to help that you are able to maybe allow them to see maybe potentially where some of this came from, the sort of the early childhood stuff, the trauma or whatever it is, the foundational stuff like that.
Right.
That is grounding and I find for myself helps to just understand a little bit more about why I am what I am or whatever,
Right. Absolutely. And I think once people, because again, if you're thinking about even narcissistic traits and you might be thinking of somebody who has had a necessity, an adaptable necessity to be self-protected, to not feel vulnerable, to not feel the less than feeling that maybe they feel at a very deep unconscious level. I think to be able to, again, kind of speak to that need or that place, it's very delicate because, again, I think these people could be very easily wounded if they felt as if that part of themselves was being threatened or threatened to be exposed, and they weren't quite ready to be able to do that. So I think it's a very delicate process. I think that is navigated very delicately and very cautiously. And there might be some areas, in which the therapeutic relationship might be damaged at times, depending on something that you may present, and they may not be ready to hear it. And if there's enough kind of ego strength that keeps them in therapy, then I think you have a wonderful opportunity of doing some emotional repair. If not, you might potentially lose a client. I mean, because it may be more than they can handle. Mm-hmm. And that's unfortunate when that happens, but it can happen.
In the episode with Sherry, I talked about how I have this sort of we both talked about how we have this hypersensitivity to sort of any sort of arrogance that we perceive in people or even just characters in television or film or whatever. And I sometimes get upset thinking about, so in my experience, and it's just mine, so it's very limited,
right.
But the people that I've interacted with in corporate environments who are quote unquote successful and who are, the CEOs and the VPs and the senior VPs, all these people, those are people that I have the most sensitivity toward. I mean, let me rephrase that. Those are the people that are the most arrogant in my experience and the most sort of, and the people I have the hardest time with because they do present as so, really they're often men and very arrogant and very outwardly just aggressive, and I don't know, that worries me. Yeah. If my sort of small sort of experience is a reality elsewhere, which I'd imagine it is in a lot of ways. Hopefully that's getting better. But how do we reconcile this where we have this world where all of the most powerful people in the world are, so outwardly, arrogant and egotistical and lacking in empathy, and how do we reconcile that?
Yeah. Wow. Gosh. What a major question. I know, right? I mean,
I think about it sometimes, though. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah. I mean, it's, gosh, and really kind of even existential in a lot of ways, right? Yeah. I mean, kind of such a big question, such kind of it's interesting. I mean, and here's actually a thought that I had with that. And I'm not sure this is where you're going with this at all, but actually the thought that I had, which maybe is going to be a little shocking or surprising, was that, gosh, how do you even say this? But what are some of the positive qualities of narcissism. And I know that sounds really weird and maybe bizarre, but what I was thinking about was, what has it meant for us societally, culturally? Meaning, what part has narcissism played either in development, technological development, or the forward movement of progress? And again, that's so subjective, in terms of what we talk about, whether that's good or bad.
I mean, you think of people like, John D. Rockefeller, or, the guy who started Ford. I forgot his name. John Ford.
Right.
John
Henry
Ford?
Ford.
Henry Ford. Henry Ford. These people are, brilliant and geniuses, and, to your point, have impacted culture and society in ways that we see to this day, right?
Correct.
But, you also hear stories of these people being terrible human beings and awful. And while they were genius in their own ways, they also treated people pretty inhumanely. And some, I'm not specifically calling out those people, but just like you hear these things, and where I hear your point.
Right.
I do hear your point, and I think it's a valid one. So maybe there's no world for, just these like super empathetic, no sort of ego leaders. Maybe that world doesn't exist. Maybe it can't. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I was, one of the thoughts that I had.
We have Trump for president.
We do.
Jeez Louise.
I mean, it's just interesting. I was thinking, you and I we did a prior episode on bipolar disorder, right? And artists and, what bipolar disorder has done, in arts, right? I mean, in terms of people's ability to create amazing art, and of course that's not everybody. I mean, but just what part has bipolar disorder played, throughout our history, with regards to artistic movements? I would imagine a good amount, or a fair amount, that has been.
At what cost?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I know that's kind of what we're wrestling with this piece, right?
Yeah.
At what cost? And I just don't know if I know. I mean,
I didn't bring it up to get specific
it's
answers, because it's just something to think about. Yeah.
Questions. I mean, and it is. I mean, I think it's a very great thought-provoking question, because, again, what do these tendencies or qualities mean, I guess, in different areas of life, right? Now, if we're going to come back to what does it mean relationally, in terms of, and again, I think this particular issue could be potentially, difficult on relationships.
Yeah. But
what's the other impact that it has in other areas of life? And again, subjective then, in terms of what's good or bad. But I think, as even you point out, and again, for our listeners, I mean, nobody that we're talking about today, whether that's your father or whether it's Henry Ford or John D. Rockefeller, I mean, we can't identify any of these people as having anything. I mean, we're not diagnosing anybody.
No.
We, but just, in reference to, are there people out there who maybe have this, either traits of, or this disorder, who find themselves in positions of power and influence? I mean, is that possible? Of course. I mean, is this type of disorder going to be, are these people who have these traits all the way to disorder going to find attractiveness in areas of power? It's certainly, obviously, very, very probable and possible, of course.
Yeah.
So
my hope is that, more things like the Me Too movement, we sort of uncovering this toxic masculinity that sort of permeates culture and corporate structures and even entertainment, like more and more sort of movements like that occur, because, I think, and the more and more we as humans stand by those movements and support them and remind each of us and ourselves that we're humans with feelings, and no one deserves that level of abuse and treatment, we're all in this together. And I think the more of that, hopefully, it gets a bit better.
Absolutely. And, I think, the nature of this podcast, you, me, empathy, empathy, again, being the key word that, we come back to so often when we talk about all these, different topics that we discuss here, and again, empathy being so relevant to this particular issue, because I think it's, the need that some of us have for that level of connection and intimacy, which requires empathy. At the end of the day, there's a requirement of empathy for those who are seeking intimate connection and healthy attachment. And, one of the things the primary thing, obviously, that we offer in this podcast is, information and education, and recognizing that, being able to be, understood by another human being, to be able to be empathically understood and to be empathically experienced is just such an important part of relationships, if that's what you seek. I mean, there are, various levels of people's ability and desires to seek out connection and empathy. I mean, that's on a spectrum as well.
Well, we have to have it. Like, I'm just like, I was thinking of like, all this like conversation about like, these existential sort of conversations we're having makes me think of like, the sort of dystopian worlds that we see in science fiction and stuff. And a world where no empathy exists, like, is the most brutal world imaginable. I can't imagine existing and coping in that world.
No, that's frightening. I mean, to think about what people would be capable of doing to one another without empathy.
It's like the Purge every day.
It would be literally like the Purge every day.
Yeah.
It's frightening, right? I mean, when you think of that. So yeah, I mean, empathy and that ability to have empathy and to demonstrate empathy. Oh my goodness, right? It's just, and it's why this podcast is really awesome, and why we get to talk about this, and why we get to be champions of empathy and create champions of empathy and create a forum for information and education around these necessary topics that we talk about, and empathy always being at the center of them, and the ability for human connection, the ability for intimacy, non-sexual intimacy. I mean, just actual human attachment, human connection, human closeness, and the healing power that has, and the transformational power that has in people's lives. Is just, again, what we get to champion and be behind. So
yeah, you heard it here first, folks. Tony loves Henry Ford. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I think that about does it. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. Lately, we've been getting some new Patreon supporters, which is very exciting. If you haven't left a review in iTunes for You, Me, Empathy, please do that. I'd like to get this show up in the charts in the self-help and health categories in iTunes. So if you haven't left us a review, go do that. Please do that. That helps support the show for free. Thank you. And thank you to Tony for being here as always.
Absolutely. Can I plug a book?
Oh, plug.
So, and I have no conflict of interest, or I have no connection to this person whatsoever. It's just a great book.
You get 10% of every sale.
Yeah, no, I wish, but no, fortunately, I get nothing other than the joy of having read it.
Awesome.
And I just think for me, it's been a great resource, with regards to the study of narcissism. But it's a book. It's called Trapped in the Mirror, and it's by Elan, Elan. Golomb, Golomb, PhD. It's I believe it's still in print, but it's.
When was it written?
It's years ago now. I can't remember when exactly it was first written, but it's been a few years. But just a great book for really understanding narcissistic personality disorder. Even the title, Trapped in the Mirror. I mean, just what a great.
It's a great title.
Yeah, it's just a really, really great title. There's another great book. It's called Disarming the Narcissist, which could be helpful for people who are dealing with, kind of having to navigate maybe the narcissist in their life. And so those are a couple of great books. Again, I get nothing from that. They're just great reads and books that I feel like are good resources for people. So
thanks.
If someone's looking to maybe read about this subject a little bit further. So
yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. I should have asked that. And those books will be linked in the show notes for this episode at yumiempathy.com. Well, you guys, thanks for listening. Follow the show at Yumi Empathy on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook community you can check out, so go check that out. And again, thanks, Tony, for the Tony time.
Always. I love it. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And as always, listeners, I'm here, you're here. We're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.